On this channel, I've noticed that a lot of the newer viewers don't really know what I'm talking about when I use certain anatomical terms like the jaw ramus, the zygomatic bone, or the mandible body, and partially this is because I've taken for granted what I expect the audience to already know since we've covered it on the channel in the past. In this new series, we're going to bring back an older series called Defining Beauty, but in a more newbie-friendly format so that you can revise what you already know or learn a thing or two and see how certain anatomical features on your face affect your facial appeal greatly. For this episode, we're going to be covering the jaw ramus and how it affects your facial aesthetic. So firstly, what is the jaw ramus? The ramus, or the rami in plural, is the bone formation that joins the lower jaw or the mandible to the rest of the skull. The reason why a tall and defined ramus is important is because of its shape and positioning. It essentially acts as a lever arm for the bite force that your face can generate. Your masseter muscles, which are responsible for the up and down movement of your jaw, aren't strong enough on their own to cut through the tough foods that your ancestors would have been eating. For this, we need what's known as a mechanical advantage to amplify the force that your bite muscles can actually put out. Quick physics lessons here. Your masseter muscles contract when you want to bite, and the entire lower jaw revolves around this hinge here at the head of the mandible. The further away the force is being applied from the hinge, the longer the lever arm is, and thus the greater the amplification effect, just like a seesaw. The lever arm in this case is the ramus, and you can imagine how well-defined jaws usually have a longer ramus and a bit of a slope to increase the lever arm. Recessed faces, on the other hand, have a short and near vertical ramus, and so the force being applied is very close to the hinge and the bite force is relatively lower and weaker. This is significant because much of our facial development early on is due to the forces that we place on it, such as from our diets, as we covered here in this video using the works of Dr. Weston Price. Your body doesn't need as much mechanical force if you're consuming a soft diet during puberty and, well, later adolescence, or if you're always mouth breathing, and so the lower jaw's development is shrunk and the ramus is both short and vertical, which isn't ideal. From a biomechanical point of view, a 45-degree angle, aka a diagonal ramus, should be the best at maximizing this mechanical advantage because it's furthest away from the hinge and thus it gives you enough height and clearance to chew properly. A more sloped ramus, say one that's past this 45-degree theoretical best, also leads to reducing the mechanical advantage, and women tend to have more of these sloped shapes compared to men with square sloped jaws, and thus they also have lower bite force too. So now the next question, now that you know what the ramus is can I actually change this feature of my face? Surprisingly, you can, but not exactly the ramus by itself. Bone can be remodeled by itself, but it's dependent on so many factors. From Humonin et al., longitudinal studies have shown that remodeling of the mandibular bone, or the lower jaw, occurs with age, where age and systemic factors as well as a loss of teeth may change the gonial angle. The gonial angle, we'll talk about that in just a second, but health-related factors like rheumatoid disease can modify the bony structures of the mandible too. Saleh and colleagues tells us that the masticatory forces, or the biting forces, exerted are different for men and women, which influence the shape and the size of the mandibular ramus, just like what I said before. In simple terms, men have square jaws because they bite harder and vice versa. This is very much a chicken or the egg problem because square jaws allow you to bite harder as a result. So which one came first, the jaw shape or the bite force? One of the most noticeable changes that you can make in your ramus, in my opinion, comes from what's known as edentulous individuals. If you have your teeth all intact, you can be considered as a dentate individual, and if they've all fallen out, such as with age, then you are edentulous. As you can imagine, not having any teeth completely changes the biomechanics of your jaw, and what would once close with a perfect seal because of your teeth now has to extend the lower jaw further to close properly. From the study, ramus height changed by a millimeter for both men and women, and while this may not seem very significant, the bigger, more noticeable changes were to the gonial angle. This term will get its own episode soon, as I mentioned, but the gonial angle is the angle of the jaw at a point known as the gonion, which we'll talk about in just a second. A higher gonial angle is more feminine, with studies listing 135 degrees and above as feminine and 130 and below as masculine. In all cases of edentullousness, which is often associated with old age and weakening masseter muscles, the jaw angle increases, supporting the idea that the ramus does strongly influence or is influenced by the bite force being applied to it. As you become edentulous, your bite force goes down, and thus your ramus, your jaw angle, everything changes and adapts to the forces that you place on it. If you want a stronger, more masculine jaw, chew harder foods and give your body a reason to use it. But understand that this is a lifelong change of lifelong effort, not a once-a-day exercise that you can just do and expect. We spoke about this in depth on the Glow Up podcast, which is a podcast dedicated to actual advice that you can follow, so I suggest you check it out. It's free on all platforms. Going back to Saleh and colleagues, they found the median ramus height to be 8.6 centimeters for men and 7.28 for women. Mind you, I'm giving you these values here, which is the condylar ramus height, meaning that it goes straight into the socket that lets your jaw move. The ramus is one of those facial characteristics where the average value is typically the most preferred or attractive, and granted that this is an Egyptian study, the values are more or less similar around the world because it's a small part of your face anyway. We can also predict one's age from the ramus, which is useful in forensics when all you have left is the skeleton or even just the jaw. Taking an average ramus height of say 8 centimeters, we plug it into the formula for a male getting a predicted age of 34, which is close to the actual age of the average of this sample group that they used here. It's easy to understand how a young boy would have a ramus height much smaller than a grown man, so this formula does make a lot of intuitive sense. We can also predict the sex from the ramus height using a similar function, where if your values from this formula are around 0.681, then your ramus is more masculine, and if it's around negative 0.831, then it's more feminine. And the reporters argued that it's correct almost 70% of the time, so it's more or less a pretty accurate measure. So now that you know the basics of why the ramus exists, what the average expected values for it are, and how it can possibly change as you get older, let's talk about how this affects your facial aesthetic. Here is a morph of a girl with a normal side profile of average ramus length and jaw angle, and here is her with a shorter ramus. It definitely makes the jawline appear sharper and more svelte, but it is a feminizing characteristic. Remember all those numbers we went over? Well, that wasn't just for fun. Women on average had lower ramus lengths and higher gonal angles than men. And so as we reduce the ramus length here, visually, it adds youthfulness and femininity, going back so far to that of a young girl. Do the reverse and the face is masculinized very greatly. With men, on the other hand, it works to their advantage in making the jaw longer, larger, and more imposing, which is obviously a dimorphic, aka masculine characteristic, within limit of course. There are a few nuances to this which might be a bit much for a newbie entry video, but let's touch on them anyway. If you want to catch the rest of this series, then please do subscribe to the channel. We put out content like this all the time. Firstly, notice how this young man, we can see the shadow of his jaw gonion. Quick recap, the jaw gonion is this anatomical region of the jaw, and if your jaw is very wide, it will pull the skin on the sides tightly, assuming that you are also lean enough for it to be seen. Being able to see the ramus is a big part of the attractiveness of the jawline, and it's something that people don't talk about enough, and we've covered this in many of our older videos on the side profile. Having the shadow be visible is the difference between a round, puffy face that is seen as cute or soft at best compared to a sharp, angular, and attractive face that is seen as hot, striking, or sensual, and this applies for both men and women. The little shadows we see on a face reveal crucial depth perception characteristics that make the face appear angular and lean, even if you are not necessarily lean in terms of body fat. They also subtly indicate healthy dentofacial development, as the shadow we see here is really only visible if your jaw is properly developed enough to pull the skin tightly apart. A recessed jaw has virtually no shadows, and there is a soft, concave shape with no angles either. The ramus border is invisible, there are no jawline shadows, and the face is overall very flat. An angular developed face, regardless of lighting conditions, will almost always have this ramus shadow because the region is notably sunken in, for most people that is, as it sits behind the most laterally wide part of the jaw. What I mean by this in simpler terms is that there will always be a shadow for most healthily developed faces because the jaw gonion, the region that we're talking about where the shadow should be, is the widest part of your jaw, and so anything behind it, by comparison, will be sunken in because it's not the widest part of the jaw. If you're wondering why your face looks soft and smooth, one of the most common ways we can explain this to the patients who come to us for an assessment is by adding shadows to their existing bone structure in Photoshop. This is an exaggerated example to show you how shadows change jawline definition in Photoshop. In the original, her jawgonian is very flat and virtually non-existent, hence it has no bordering shadow, but by adding it back in with Photoshop, the definition is very clear to see, and we've essentially created a feature that wasn't there originally. After this video, you'll start to notice that the length of the ramus, its slope and angle, and the shadow it produces are very much one of the key features for an attractive jaw. We'll cover the remainder of the features in the future episodes of this series of Facial Aesthetics 101. If you'd like to get your face assessed, to learn about whether you have a masculine or feminine ramus, your jaw angles and how they affect your face, or just get an in-depth look into the face itself, order a curves facial evaluation over at our website, performed by our in-house team of doctors and dentists to help you achieve that next big glow up. As always, follow us on Instagram for bite-sized content and subscribe to us on YouTube.